can we talk about that lead up to the World Cup final, and what stood out to you? What players stood out to you? What tactics stood out to you? Because we've kind of alluded to those things as a tipping point, a changing moment in not only Sri Lankan cricket history but cricket history overall. And I'll start with you, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start with Sanath and Kalu, right? I was looking back this morning. So in that group stage game against India, where they went, I think it was in Delhi, they were 42 for none after 3 overs. And they chased down 271, which was a big chase in those days.
Mm-hmm.
I think they made 78 in the last 13 overs. Again, these are like paltry numbers by modern standards, but in 1996, those things were a big deal. And then again against Kenya, they were 83 for none after 6.4 overs. So they were getting the kind of starts which were just totally unprecedented in that era. So I think, yeah, you start with Sanath and Kalu at the top being incredibly explosive. I think someone who's kind of forgotten about in the context of this tournament is Asanka Gurasinghe, who, like, for me, for this era of cricket, he was kind of the ideal number three. People always talk about him as the rock in this batting order, which like more explosive players could build around. And I think he averaged 50 plus. He was run out, I believe, 3 times in 6 innings, so he could have scored more runs. He had that kind of ability to soak up pressure and then big power. I think he struck quite a lot of sixes in the back end of one of the group games innings. I think maybe against Zimbabwe or Kenya. I can't remember which.
Mm-hmm.
But then obviously you've got Aravinda, who was amazing throughout the tournament, and then you've got that big buffer, right, of 3 more batters in Roshan, Hashan, and Arjuna. I mean, then I think the other thing, so it's that already sets Sri Lanka apart, because the fact that they're using part-time spinners means they can field 7 frontline batters. And they had like the most incredible amount of experience especially in Asian conditions, right? So I think Arjuna's the most experienced player at the tournament. He had captained more games of ODI cricket than Mark Taylor had played. I think you've got like 800 plus caps between Arjuna, Aravinda, Hashan, Roshan, and Gurasinghe and Sanath. No, the 6 of them, they've got like 850 ODI caps between them. So they've played a hell of a lot of cricket, most of it in Asia. And then the other thing I think is just like how good the spinners were throughout the tournament, how they were able to pick up wickets while keeping the runs down. So I've got some figures here. Sri Lanka bowled 134.1 overs in the knockouts, and the spinners bowled 95.1 of them. And as a unit, they went at 20.31 runs per wicket, going at basically 4 and over throughout the tournament. So when you think of like the length of the batting lineup and those contributions, they're basically match-winning impacts, right? In the quarterfinals, they bowled 35 overs combined, 155 runs for 6 wickets. In the semi, on like a pitch which broke down, they bowled 23.1 overs, 7 for 68 as a unit. So like those contributions, hugely important. I think you see in the final, Australia were going really well after 25 overs. And it's that period between 25 and 40 where I think the spinners really took control, and Sri Lanka won the game or Australia lost the game, depending on how you look at it. So, yeah, sorry, I'm ranting. You get me onto history and I don't stop talking. But yeah, I think there were a lot of things Sri Lanka had going for it throughout the tournament.
Yeah, Estelle, what stood out to you in those sort of opening matches in terms of how this team came out and played and sort of topped their group? Obviously 2 walkover wins, but they get 3 other wins from 3 matches as well.
Yeah, firstly, I think Nick's point on the bowlers is really valid, because I think that's one thing that people don't really talk about. I mean, if you look at, I was looking for some pictures from the 96 World Cup, and if you look for Sri Lanka, I think probably 80% of them will be Aravind in the final, or Arjuna in the final, or them lifting the trophy, right? You don't really get that many of the bowlers. And in fact, if you look at how the tournament went, there were some games where Sri Lanka, the bowlers really had to dig them out, right? Like the way the spinners in particular were able to control things out in the middle. I think, like I said, it was a fairy tale. And sometimes when you talk about fairy tales, it it's incredible how so many things seem to kind of fall into place. And in this case, I think the conditions, right? Sri Lanka have that many batters who can bowl, and the conditions are also very spin friendly. So they were able to go with those combinations that they wanted. I mean, if it was a tournament played in South Africa or Australia, where the pitches are much faster, perhaps they would not have been that effective. And if you look across that bowling attack, sure, now you look at it and say, you know what, Sanath was a great all-rounder, Aravinda was a decent all-rounder, Vas is a great, all-time great fast bowler, Murali is probably the greatest spinner in ODI cricket, right? But in 96, they were just average. Like none of them were superstars by then, right? They were all just there to do the job. And I think that's one thing that, like, looking back now 20 plus years later, that's one thing that stands out. And of course, as Nick mentioned, that the batting order and getting Sanath and Kalu up the order, they would not have been able to play the way they played if they didn't have that that set of batters to come, right? And the experience, as Nick mentioned again, even if you have 8 batters and some of them are newbies, then you kind of have that doubt, right, in your mind, will they be able to handle it? But I think Arjuna in particular had the faith that, look, even if Sri Lanka lose 5 wickets, they've got Roshan, Hashan and Vas Dharmasena to come, who can put some runs on the board. So it's just like, when you look at it now and think, how the hell did they have this belief, right? Like, that they would win? Because there are so many stories about how I think when Australia said that they would not be traveling to Sri Lanka, was it there's a story that Arjuna had said, look, we're going to we want them in the final, we want to face them in the final. And he already had that confidence that Sri Lanka are going to go all the way in this tournament, right? And whether you agree with Australia's and West Indies' decision not to travel to Sri Lanka, personally, I can understand the perspective, because nobody wants to take a risk like that, right? But all of that, it turned into some kind of this fateful thing for Sri Lanka, right, where everything they needed to do was happening for them. So it's like, even when we talk about the Women's Asia Cup last year, I think that's something that comes up, right? Some things just you can't explain. It's not statistically something you can represent. It just, things just fall into place sometimes for teams. And I think, again, that's it for Sri Lanka, because who would have thought, right? Who would have thought they would be in that final? Forget about winning it. Who would have thought they'd be in the final at the end of the day?